Welcome, welcome weary football pilgrims to lower leagues. Tonight our tale begins not in a soggy car park outside Accrington, nor under flickering floodlights in the Conference North, but in Paris, or more precisely, in the glint of gold locked behind a velvet curtain. A trophy, to be exact. One that measures 28 centimetres in height, 22 in diameter, and weighs a rather significant 12 kilograms. It glows like polished brass in a noir detective drama and looks, if you squint slightly, like something a discerning Bond villain might use as an ostentatious paperweight. Perhaps for his plans for global domination, scrawled on parchment, weighing it down so a rogue gust of wind doesn't reveal his fiendish intentions. Ah yes, the Ballon d'Or, the golden ball. A thing of undeniable beauty certainly, with its gleaming facets and artisanal heritage. Crafted meticulously by the French jewellery house Millerio Ditzmiller since its very inception, it carries the quiet gravitas of something truly precious. But even with all that dazzling artistry, it's also a rather heavy burden of expectation, wouldn't you say? A gilded question mark perpetually suspended in the air. It was born in 1956, not in some gleaming, sterile boardroom or through the machinations of a vast marketing agency. No, its genesis was far more prosaic, yet perhaps more profound. It emerged from the ink-stained pages of France Football magazine, conjured into existence by two sports writers of the old world, Gabriel Hanot and Jacques Ferrand. Picture them, if you will, in an era where tobacco smoke still curled lazily from typewriters, where match reports were dictated over crackling phone lines, and a footballer's diet involved a fair bit of wine at lunchtime. Their ambition was simple, yet contained within it a monumental paradox. They wanted a way to honour individual brilliance. A prize, they declared, for the finest player performing most exceptionally over the preceding season. And so they conjured it, a handmade orb, meticulously rendered, ornate, and perhaps a little overthought, as if the Vatican itself had been asked to craft a cricket ball, gilded naturally. But even in that very first glimmer, in the quiet contemplation of its founders, the contradictions danced. Because football is not at its heart a game of individuals. Not really. It's a beautifully chaotic ballet performed by 22 souls, often confused, sometimes divinely inspired, occasionally in the wrong-coloured socks, stumbling and soaring toward a fleeting moment of collective coherence. You can't lift a trophy alone, can you? You need the lad who covers your surging run down the flank, the goalkeeper who shouts at you even when you're standing in precisely the right place, the industrious midfielder whose boots always smell faintly of deep heat and damp earth. You need the whole sprawling, breathing organism that is a football team. And yet, here it stands, a prize for one. A solitary golden spotlight sweeping across the vast green canvas of the pitch, meticulously picking out a single face from the collective. Sometimes it's the one who scores the most goals, his name echoing loudest in the roar of the crowd. Sometimes it's the one who sells the most replica shirts, his image beamed onto billboards across continents. And sometimes, though vanishingly rarely, it must be said, it's the one who simply made everything look effortless, the quiet architect behind the grand designs, his genius almost imperceptible to the casual eye. The Ballon d'Or, we are told, is judged on three noble pillars. Like ancient commandments etched onto a stone tablet, these criteria aim to provide a guiding light through the inherent murkiness of individual evaluation within a team sport. Firstly, there's individual performances characterized by decisive and impressive actions. This sounds wonderfully clear, doesn't it? Until you try to quantify the decisive nature of a perfectly timed tackle versus a thunderbolt from 30 yards. Secondly, team performances and achievements. This acknowledges the collective, the trophies, the clean sheets, the unbeaten runs. But how much of the team's glory can legitimately be apportioned to a single pair of shoulders? And then, the most ephemeral, the most wonderfully British of all criteria, the player's overall class and fair play, which is a little like trying to pick your favourite pint based on the perfect amount of fizz, the ideal head of foam, and, perhaps, its spiritual alignment with your current current mood. Admirable, certainly, but hardly a scientific metric. This very attempt to isolate and celebrate individual excellence within a fundamentally collective framework is where the award's enduring tension truly lies. It gives rise almost inevitably to continuous discussion, debate, and the faint, persistent whispers of discontent. The award is often described by its critics, with a knowing shrug and a wry smile, as little more than a popularity contest. It faces relentless scrutiny for daring to single out an individual in a sport where collective effort is paramount. This fundamental paradox, this enduring quest for singular recognition in a vast, sprawling, interdependent sport, underpins many of the controversies and perceived oversights that have marked the Ballon d'Or's history. Different stakeholders, the journalists who voted for decades, the coaches and captains who joined the fray later, the public whose vociferous opinions echo across social media, often prioritize the highly visible, the easily quantifiable, the prolific goal-scoring, the flamboyant dribble. Less overt, yet equally crucial team-oriented roles often recede into the shadows, leading to ongoing debates about the award's fairness and its elusive objectivity. But still, despite the arguments, despite the accusations of bias, despite the philosophical gymnastics it demands, the award endures. It grows, it glitters, its luster never truly fades. Because in the end, in the deep, quiet chambers of our sporting hearts, we love a hero. We always have. From the mythic Achilles, battling on the plains of Troy, to the slightly less mythic Andy Carroll, battling for a header in an extremely aggressive penalty box. We crave those figures who rise above, those moments of individual genius that spark wonder. But what does it truly mean to be the best in this magnificent, messy game? Can it truly be measured solely by goals, assists, or the number of times your name trends across the fleeting ether of the internet? Is the winger who dances past three men with effortless grace more deserving than the stoic fullback who never ever lets him through? Is a World Cup winner, propelled to glory by a host of teammates, automatically more brilliant than the humble lad who scored 50 goals in a single season but saw his club knocked out in the quarter-finals of some lesser competition? These are not questions designed for the sleep-deprived, certainly, but alas, we're here now together to ponder them. The Ballon d'Or has become, over the decades, a peculiar sort of mirror, but not a clean one, no. It's often smudged with fingerprints, clouded by subjective breath, and occasionally distorted by the ambient heat of global celebrity. It reflects glory, yes, but also ego, fashion, compelling narratives, and the sheer, overwhelming noise of modern media. It is, in many ways, the most beautiful, most absurd, and most enduring popularity contest the world has ever known, and in that, in its very essence, there is both profound poetry and quiet farce. In the coming chapters, as the hours grow late and the world outside settles into a quiet hum, we shall follow this gleaming orb through time. From the almost forgotten triumph of Sir Stanley Matthews to the seemingly endless reign of Lionel Messi, from the golden era of Alfredo Di Stefano to the heartbreaking near miss of Robert Lewandowski, we will meet the truly deserving, the undeniably denied, and the deeply confusing recipients. We'll gently examine what the Ballon d'Or, in its waxing and waning, says about football itself, and what, perhaps more significantly, it quietly forgets. And if we're lucky, if the rhythm of our story finds its mark, we might even doze off somewhere between the golden elegance of Michel Platini and the tireless brilliance of Pavel Nedved. So then, the Ballon d'Or. Let's follow it. Let's chase the shimmer, even if we know deep down it's often just reflected light on a team sheet full of shadows, both bright and dim. Chapter 1, 1956 to 1959, the Matthews and Di Stefano years. The first name to be etched into the Ballon d'Or's golden scroll wasn't some sprightly prodigy or media darling in silver boots. No, it was Sir Stanley Matthews, a man who by 1956 had reached the frankly baffling footballing age of 41. A gentleman on the pitch and off, he seemed to belong more to the sepia-toned world of ration books and quiet cues than to the future of football celebrity. He played with the elegance of a man unfazed by time, gliding more than galloping, less a winger, more a phantom swan coasting across a mill pond at dusk, rarely raising his voice and almost certainly offering to help the referee collect his whistle should it fall. He was the first, and remains the oldest, recipient of the award, a quiet testament to longevity and consistent, unflashy excellence. His win felt ceremonial, not in a hollow sense, but as if football had decided collectively to honor a lifetime of careful brushstrokes on the game's canvas. Like handing a long-awaited umbrella to a man who's walked through 30 years of drizzle without complaint. Matthew's award was not so much a reward for a single season, but an overdue recognition of steadfast brilliance, a living embodiment of the sport's quieter virtues. In that 1955-56 season, he'd helped Blackpool to a decent second-place finish in the First Division, and though his statistical return wasn't gaudy, his influence remained palpable, a relic of the sport's purer pre-commercial age. Yet standing just behind him in the voting, lurking slightly, like a well-dressed spectre in the wings, was Alfredo Di Stefano, the Argentine-born polymath of football, who had played in Colombia and become Spanish by necessity more than nationalism. Di Stefano was, by contrast, the future, a man of multiple positions and multiple passports. He finished second in that inaugural vote, but would not be denied for long. In 1957, Di Stefano claimed his first Ballon d'Or. Real Madrid had won La Liga and retained the European Cup, and Di Stefano had been nothing short of talismanic. He scored 31 goals in the league, earning the Pichichi Trophy, and his blend of craft and graft was redefining the modern forward. In the European Cup, his presence was decisive, orchestrating attacks, linking midfield to the cutting edge. He was a conductor in boots, and for once, the journalists saw the full score. Then, in 1958, the Golden Ball was handed to Raymond Kopa, the French inside forward with a face like a 1950s cigarette advert, all soft angles and silent promises. That season, Kopa had completed his move from Reims to Real Madrid, slotting in seamlessly alongside Di Stefano. Together they swept to a third consecutive European Cup. Kopa was the glinting foil to Di Stefano's gravitas, drifting between the lines, supplying passes and popping up with goals. He also starred for France in the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, where Les Bleus finished third, and Kopa was named in the tournament's all-star team. That mix of continental success and World Cup brilliance proved irresistible. By 1959, Di Stefano returned to the summit. Real Madrid had just clinched their fourth straight European Cup, and once again he was its spine. He topped the La Liga scoring charts, won another Pichichi, and bossed the European Cup final against Reims with majestic ease. It was his second Ballon d'Or, and had the rules allowed, there might have been more. Where Matthews was all composure and classical form, Di Stefano was the full orchestra. He didn't merely play, he arranged the tempo, conducted the transitions, tuned the rhythms. At Real Madrid, he was the imperial centerpiece, part emperor, part engine room, part rogue cartographer, forever mapping out attacks in ink only he could see. He scored, yes, but he also tackled like a man avenging a slight, passed like a mathematician solving geometry in motion, and drifted everywhere and nowhere with purposeful intent. He was the sort of footballer who could probably organise the town's entire bus timetable during half-time, and you'd have no doubt he'd get all the connections right. But the Ballon d'Or, for all its newness and glamour, was born into a small world. Its boundaries, strictly European nationality and European club football, created a hallowed but claustrophobic chamber. That rule, seemingly innocuous, excluded the vast, riotous brilliance blooming beyond the continent's edge. While Matthews twirled down the wing in Blackpool, a boy named Pelé had already begun rewriting the game's laws in Brazil. He was not eligible, not even considered, a quiet brilliance growing on the other side of a curtain the rest of the world had yet to part. The Ballon d'Or could only see what it allowed itself to see. Paris, meanwhile, was too busy looking over its own monocled shoulder. Pelé, who would win 3 World Cups and redefine beauty in motion, never received the award in his playing years. It was only in 2015, through a retrospective by France Football, that they sheepishly admitted he might have won it 7 times. 7. The same number, ironically, Lionel Messi would reach decades later. And it wasn't just Pelé. Diego Maradona, a short, divine storm of a player who made the improbable seem inevitable, also never won the Ballon d'Or in his prime. Like Pelé, he was omitted not through lack of greatness, but through a bureaucratic wrinkle. When France football tried to make amends, an honorary Ballon d'Or here, a retrospective nod there, it felt less like justice and more like remembering, mid-toast, that you'd left the bride off the wedding invitations, a realization at once ridiculous and quietly tragic. These early exclusions point to a deeper philosophical twitch in the award's soul. The Ballon d'Or was trying to do something inherently difficult, isolate individual brilliance in a collective dance. And worse, it was trying to do so while peering through a keyhole in a room full of mirrors, each one reflecting only what it already believed to be true. For years, the only people who got a vote were European journalists, many of whom were more familiar with the short back and sides of a domestic fullback than the elusive dazzle of a Sao Paulo forward. What does it mean to be the best if only certain eyes are allowed to watch? In those early years, the award favoured the flamboyant scorers and creative midfielders who graced their own columns. Goalkeepers and defenders? Not so much. Lev Yashin, the Soviet sentinel in black, wouldn't win until 1963, and to this day remains the only goalkeeper to do so. Until then, defence was something you covered in a paragraph, not something you crowned. The idea of awarding a Ballon d'Or to someone who prevented excitement rather than caused it must have sounded to some voters like giving the Booker Prize to a punctuation specialist. Still, there's a strange innocence to these first pages of the Ballon d'Or's story, an amateur charm. It was not yet a global media spectacle nor a commercial colossus. The trophy itself hadn't yet become a backdrop for marketing campaigns and algorithmic arguments. It was simply a golden ball, weighty, lovely, and earnestly intended to mean something profound. And so the story began, with a Victorian winger, a cosmopolitan conductor, and a whole world of brilliance left quietly on the wrong side of a closed curtain. Next we step into the 1960s, a decade when geopolitics met goal-scoring, and the golden ball tried, sometimes awkwardly, to peek beyond its own backyard. But for now, let Sir Stanley Matthews glide you towards sleep, socks rolled down and sportsman's smile intact. And if you dream deeply enough, you might just glimpse Di Stéfano, still roaming somewhere, setting the tempo beneath a dim, eternal floodlight, his every touch echoing like ghostly commentary across a sky no one quite remembers switching off. Chapter 2, 1960-1964. The Pioneers of the 60s. As the 1960s began unspooling their blend of optimism and tension, a decade of miniskirts and missile crises, the Ballon d'Or wandered into an uneasy adolescence. It was still European in mind and method, still stubborn in scope, but slowly, ever so slowly, showing signs that it might one day look beyond its own backyard. It was a trophy that believed in a beautiful gilded cage, but the world outside was rattling the bars. The decade's first laureate, Luis Suarez. No, not that one, but the elegant, original Luis from Spain, was a player of supreme poise. To this day, he remains Spain's only male Ballon d'Or winner, a lonely emperor on a forgotten throne. He was the maestro at Barcelona, then Inter Milan, a playmaker who stitched together movement and meaning with threadbare grace. In 1960, he orchestrated Barcelona's La Liga triumph and led them to the European Cup semi-finals, his elegant control and balletic turns lighting up a continent still clutching its trenchcoats, still recovering from the last war and bracing for the next. If Matthews had been a swan, a creature of slow, purposeful beauty, Suarez was a chess grandmaster in boots, always 3 moves ahead, sipping espresso in the mind while others gulped their tactics raw. He played with a silence that demanded attention. In 1961, the ball passed to Omar Sivori, the Argentine-turned-Italian forward who seemed, at times, to be dribbling past his own shadow just for fun. A flickering, fiery talent at Juventus, Sivori scored 25 goals that season and took his club to the Scudetto, all with a glint of rebellion in his eyes. He wasn't the neat, tidy footballer. He played with a low centre of gravity and a wild, almost anarchic spirit, a man whose every touch was a flirtation with chaos. He played like a man escaping something, each feint and flick a protest against predictability, each nutmeg a small, defiant act of grace. He won the Ballon d'Or not with the cool certainty of inevitability, but with a wild grin and a raised eyebrow, as if daring the voters to say no, as if to say, here's something you weren't expecting. 1962 gave us Josef Masopust, the Czech midfielder with the gait of a philosophy lecturer and the heart of a silent revolutionary. He led Czechoslovakia to the World Cup final and brought a quiet majesty to midfield, a man whose feet whispered rather than shouted. He didn't burst past defenders, he melted past them, an elegant blur of motion. Masopust's genius was in the effortless, the unhurried. You would watch him for 10 minutes and see him do nothing. And then, suddenly, you'd realize he'd done everything. His Ballon d'Or win was like awarding a Nobel to a monk who'd written his thesis in wind, a tribute to a kind of brilliance so subtle it could almost be missed. He was a beautiful, powerful anomaly, a quiet ambassador for a different way of playing. Then came the Black Spider. Lev Yashin, the Soviet titan in coal-black kits, claimed the prize in 1963 and remains the only goalkeeper to have done so. His win was a triumph of negation, a vote for silence, stillness, and the uncanny ability to make nothing happen at just the right time. Yashin didn't just keep goals out, he swallowed them whole, absorbing the force and fury of the opposition. He stood in Moscow's snow, gloves like iron gates, turning chaos away with the weary grace of a man who'd already seen it all, a man whose primary job was to prevent the story from being written. His triumph was a momentary, glorious aberration rather than a genuine shift in the award's underlying philosophy, a strange, beautiful nod to the sentinel rather than the storm. By 1964, the Ballon d'Or returned west, landing in the precise boots of Denis Law, the Scottish terrier of Manchester United, all tousled hair and predator's instinct. Law was chaos tamed, sharp, lethal, occasionally incandescent with mischief. That year, he netted 30 league goals, pushing United back toward relevance after the Munich air disaster, and doing it all with a kind of joyful menace. He played like he had something to prove, like he carried the weight of something unspoken and immense, and that something was everything. He was a force of nature, a footballer who was simply incapable of being boring. The 60s had begun to stretch their legs. They were no longer tiptoeing, now they prowled, in brogues and boots alike. And while the award still clung tightly to its European core, names like Masopust and Yashin whispered of ideological breaches, subtle reminders that football's brilliance, like moonlight through curtains, couldn't be entirely contained by borders or political doctrines. It was a continent voting on itself, but at least now it was occasionally letting in a guest from across the ideological divide. Next, we continue deeper into the decade, where the golden ball meets colonial legacy, countercultural flair, and the velvet-footed philosophers of Milan and Manchester. But for now, let Lev Yashin hold the line at the gates of sleep, eyes fixed on dreams you haven't had yet. Let Masopust drift sideways into slumber unnoticed by time, always in control. Chapter 3, 1965 and 1969. The World and the King of Cool. By the mid-60s, the Ballon d'Or had begun, very reluctantly, to acknowledge that talent might arrive from stranger coordinates. That brilliance might come wearing unfamiliar boots, carrying accents, stories, and styles that didn't fit cleanly within its Parisian frame. The award had spent its early years admiring its own reflection, but now the world was starting to knock on the window. In 1965, the orb landed at the feet of Eusebio. Born in Mozambique, raised by Benfica, Eusebio was thunder in motion. That year, he'd led Benfica to a Portuguese title and the European Cup final, scoring with a ferocity that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. He moved like someone had lit a fire under the turf itself, all sharp angles and devastating acceleration. His shot, they say, was a blur, a cannonball fired from the hip. Power, precision, and a fierce, unshakable pride were fused in one wiry, devastating package. The voters couldn't look away, not from that speed, that shot, that storm. He was a crucial step forward for the Ballon d'Or. albeit one wrapped in colonial complexity, African roots filtered through European success, a hint of the wider world being seen, but only on its own continent's terms. Then came the modern monarchs of Manchester. In 1966, the serene heart of England's World Cup triumph, Bobby Charlton won the prize. He played with the solemn clarity of someone who'd seen too much, survived too much. A Munich survivor turned metronome, he dictated games with a gravity that belied his gentle nature, each long-range thunderbolt of a shot a small private explosion of release. His win was history voted in real time, part celebration, part eulogy for the men he lost. He was a man of quiet, powerful purpose, a footballer who had walked out of the smoke and noise and learned to play with a kind of profound, lasting grace. In 1967, the crown passed to Florian Albert, the Hungarian forward with the looks of a matinee idol and the vision of an oracle. He played for Ferencváros, and in a quieter, less televised corner of Europe, he was a king. That season, he topped the scoring charts in the Intercities Fairs Cup and reminded the world that Hungary hadn't faded entirely. It had just gone quieter, its genius existing in a different frequency. Albert's game was one of sublime, almost supernatural intelligence. He didn't so much play football as see it from above, like a hawk circling a field, already knowing where the ball would land and where the defenders would be. His win was a final, graceful note from a great footballing culture that had once redefined the game. Then came the boy from Belfast, a boy who became a man and a myth simultaneously. In 1968, George Best finally got his hands on the orb. A global icon wrapped in the dishevelled glamour of a rock star, Best was part illusionist, part unmanageable genius. He scored 32 goals that year and helped Manchester United win the European Cup, all while making defenders question their career choices and spectators question their very senses. Best didn't just play football, he played with it. He juggled it, laughed at it, seduced it. His Ballon d'Or win was inevitable and impossible, much like Best himself. It was a triumph of pure, untamed expression over all else, the sort of victory that smells of expensive aftershave and late nights. The decade closed in 1969 with an Italian Gianni Rivera, a footballer who seemed to operate on a different emotional frequency, subtle, cerebral, and maddeningly elusive. The first Italian to win, Rivera was the golden child of AC Milan, lifting the European Cup and Intercontinental Cup that year, with passes that defied physics and defenders who mistook stillness for slowness. He didn't run past you, he stood where you were going to be, a ghost in a white jersey. He played with a kind of poetic logic, a man whose ideas for goals were a full paragraph, while everyone else was still on their first word. The 1960s closed not with a whimper, but with a symphony, one conducted by dribblers, dreamers, and the occasional dishevelled genius. The Ballon d'Or had glimpsed a broader, more complex world, and there was no turning back now. Next we drift into the 1970s, the age of total football, glittering arrogance, and the continental cool of men who made triangles into gospel. But for now, let Eusebio sprint through your dreams like a silhouette on fire. Let Rivera thread the ball between the posts of sleep. And let George Best, brilliant, tragic George, make you smile just before the world turns soft and still. Chapter 4, 1970-1974. The Rise of Total Football. By the nascent years of the 1970s, football, bless its muddy boots, had begun to truly dance. Not literally, of course. This was still a world of heavy leather balls, pitches often slicked with the benevolent grime of the earth, and haircuts that, shall we say, prioritized volume over aerodynamic efficiency. But before the waltz there was a workman, a striker who was less a dancer and more a demolition expert. In 1970, the Ballon d'Or was given not to a pioneer of beautiful chaos, but to a man whose genius lay in the brutal simplicity of putting a football in the back of the net. Gerd Müller, Der Bomber, they called him, a man who, in that pivotal year, scored a frankly ridiculous 10 goals for West Germany at the World Cup and helped Bayern Munich to a dominant season. He wasn't fleet-footed or elegant. He looked, if truth be told, a bit like a baker who had mistakenly wandered onto the pitch, all thick thighs and a low centre of gravity. His movement was not a flowing ballet, but a series of shuffles, jinks, and lightning-fast turns in and around the penalty box, always ending with a goal. He was a force of nature, a specialist who had perfected one craft to a point of near supernatural efficiency. His win felt like the last gasp of an older world, a final emphatic statement that goals in the end were still the currency that mattered most. And yet, despite Muller's undeniable impact and the brute force of his statistics, his triumph was a brief, anomalous pause before the true revolution arrived. And then the revolution arrived. Tactically, spiritually, the game had found a new, exhilarating rhythm, a captivating, almost dizzying waltz. The Dutch, with their quiet brilliance, simply called it total football. The rest of the bewildered world, watching on with a mixture of awe and confusion, might have called it beautiful chaos, a system where players moved with the bewildering fluidity of a flock of birds, constantly interchanging, constantly creating new spaces and new problems. Leading this mesmerizing choreography, the central figure in this grand, unfolding spectacle was Johan Cruyff, a man who seemed to be part philosopher, part gazelle, a thinker with legs that moved with impossible grace. He collected the Ballon d'Or not once, not twice, but 3 times in the span of just 4 years. In 1971, then again in 1973, and finally in 1974. Each win, to those who truly understood the game, felt undeniably deserved. But each triumph, paradoxically, also raised a fresh question about the very nature of individual genius in this evolving team sport. Cruyff didn't just play the game, he fundamentally reimagined it. He moved across the pitch not as a fixed point, a designated striker or a defined midfielder, but like a man wandering through a vast room with no furniture, always finding space, always possessing an almost preternatural vision. He was the embodiment of total football, a system where any outfield player could seamlessly assume the role of another, creating unpredictable patterns that bewildered opponents and thrilled purists. But how, one might ask, do you vote for vision? How do you quantify the subtle artistry of positional intelligence, the almost imperceptible glide between 2 defenders that opens a new universe of attacking possibility, the seemingly effortless flick of a boot that summons a chance from thin air for a teammate? The European journalists, the sole arbiters of the golden ball at this time, bless their well-meaning hearts, tried. They genuinely did. But still, many, perhaps most, instinctively leaned toward the player who actually scored the goal, the final decisive action, rather than the elusive architect who had, in essence, summoned the entire opportunity from the ether. A goal is a headline. Cruyff's genius was often a whispered anecdote, a knowing nod among connoisseurs. In between Cruyff's mesmerizing run of triumphs came Franz Beckenbauer, the German maestro who claimed the award in 1972, the Kaiser, a man who played centre-half not as a brute force, a mere stopper, but like a serene, elegant conductor leading a vast orchestra of strings. He too was a revolutionary, fundamentally redefining defensive roles. He embodied the libero, the modern sweeper, a defensive player who was freed from rigid marking responsibilities and instead became a proactive intervener, launching attacks from deep within his own half. His elegance, his effortless control of the ball, and his uncanny ability to anticipate opponents' moves set him apart. He didn't just stop attacks, he started them, effortlessly transitioning defense into devastating offense. And yet, despite Beckenbauer's undeniable impact and his groundbreaking role, his presence on the winners' list still feels, in the grand sweep of the award's history, like a brief, slightly anomalous detour. A nod to tactical complexity, perhaps, in an era that still preferred its brilliance loud and statistically neat. He was an exception that, in the long run, often proved the rule. The Ballon d'Or's unwavering, almost gravitational pull towards the attacking third of the pitch. Cruyff and Beckenbauer, therefore, were not just brilliant footballers. They were tactical revolutionaries, their very presence on the pitch challenging the rigid definitions of footballing roles that had largely governed the game for decades. But the award itself, the structure, the voting panel, the very lens through which greatness was perceived, was still adjusting, still straining to comprehend the seismic shifts these players represented. It knew something truly remarkable was happening. It just wasn't always quite sure what box to tick on the voting slip, or how to fully articulate the profound impact of players who defied easy categorization. There's a growing, almost palpable sense here in the early 1970s of an ingrained positional bias. The insidious idea that attacking flair is simply easier to see, easier to appreciate, and, crucially, easier to sell to a public increasingly consuming football through the medium of television. After all, a goal, a dazzling individual run, a flamboyant trick, these are concrete, visceral moments, easily replayed, easily celebrated. They are undeniably headlines. A press-resistant midfielder whose genius lies in recycling possession under pressure, or a defender whose brilliance is manifested in perfectly anticipating danger before it even fully forms, these are anecdotes. Their contributions, though often vital to a team's success, are less visible, less quantifiable. Even when a defender or a holding midfielder truly makes the decisive difference in a match, the thunderous applause, and more importantly the critical attention, often lands elsewhere. The quiet work, the defensive solidity, the midfield orchestration, these remain largely unsung by the gilded chorus of individual accolades. And so the 1970s Ballon d'Or wrestled with its own identity. It had arguably outgrown the polite, slightly predictable football of the Sir Stanley Matthews era, where roles were clearly defined and brilliance shone brightest through individual jewels. It was genuinely trying to recognize evolution, the revolutionary systems, the fluid redefinition of roles, the sheer, boundless tactical imagination that players like Cruyff and Beckenbauer embodied. But its tools were still, in essence, crude. A simple vote from a geographically limited pool of journalists, a single list of names, a concise summary of their perceived merits. The sheer complexity of total football, where every player was both attacker and defender, challenged the very notion of isolating individual excellence. Cruyff certainly deserved his multiple wins. So too did Franz Beckenbauer. But what's truly interesting, what lingers in the quiet contemplation of history, is not merely that they won, it's how close they came to not being fully noticed at all by an award system still rooted in older, simpler paradigms. Their brilliance, so nuanced and holistic, was almost too sophisticated for the blunt instrument of the Ballon d'Or at that time. Now let's move on to the latter half of the 1970s, a period of shifting stages and underappreciated brilliance, a time where geopolitical shadows still lingered over the game, and Diego Maradona, just off stage in Argentina, waited patiently, and ultimately in vain, for his turn to be ignored by the most prestigious individual award in the world. Sleep now, and if you can, let your dreams dance in fluid triangles, with the ghost of Johan Cruyff perpetually at the tip, orchestrating the beautiful, endless confusion. Chapter 5, 1975 to 1979. Keegan's Rise in the Eastern Stars. As the 1970s wore on and the flares in the stands grew wider while the football itself became ever more intricate, the Ballon d'Or began to drift further east, or at least it permitted itself to cast a fleeting, curious glance beyond the familiar, often foggy cathedrals of Western European football. In 1975, the Golden Ball found an unexpected home. Oleg Blokin won the award, a triumph not just for the lightning-quick forward himself, but for the very different map he came from. He was a Dynamo Kiev man, a formidable striker under the austere red flag of the Soviet Union, and his win felt like a crackling, slightly muffled telegram from the other side of history. Blokin was a phenomenon. He didn't just play football, he sprinted through it, a blur of speed and controlled aggression. He ran like an Olympic sprinter, powered by raw athleticism and an unshakable will to win. His finishing, they said, had the clinical precision of a poet penning a perfect couplet, each shot a definitive, unanswerable statement. He was consistently the top goalscorer in the Soviet top league, a formidable competition in its own right, leading Dynamo Kiev to multiple domestic titles and, significantly, 2 UEFA Cup Winners' Cups. Yet, to many in the West, Blokin remained somewhat of an enigma. He was a name on a stat line, certainly, a series of impressive numbers on a grainy teleprinter, but perhaps not a fully formed story. That year, France football crowned the USSR's best, a player whose brilliance was undeniable, but only, crucially, within Europe's strictly defined boundaries. The Cold War was still very much cold, its ideological chill seeping into every aspect of life, yet football, that magnificent, unpredictable cultural trickster, was somehow finding faint cracks in the seemingly impenetrable ice. Blokin's victory was clear evidence that sheer, unadulterated brilliance could not be entirely contained by political ideology, a testament to the fact that even walls of concrete and political dogma could not entirely block the signal of undeniable sporting genius. Then in 1976, the golden ball returned to familiar hands, landing on the desk of Franz Beckenbauer. It was his second win, a bookend to his first in 1972, and it felt like the final, majestic flourish of a passing era. Beckenbauer, the Kaiser, had just captained Bayern Munich to their third consecutive European Cup, a feat of pure, regal dominance that would define the mid-70s. His win that year was a quiet coronation, a final graceful bow from the undisputed king of a footballing dynasty. It was a nod to the fact that even as the game twisted and turned toward new tactical horizons, the profound, almost spiritual elegance of the libero, a defender who was also a conductor, still held a sacred place in the heart of the sport. A couple of years later, in 1977, the Ballon d'Or threw another curveball, a truly unexpected arc that surprised even some seasoned observers. Allan Simonsen, a diminutive Danish playmaker with the look of an off-duty geography teacher and the poise of a violinist mid-recital, won the award. Simonsen plied his trade for Borussia Mönchengladbach, a German club then making significant waves in Europe. That season he'd been crucial, helping his club to the UEFA Cup final and securing a third consecutive Bundesliga title. Simonsen wasn't loud. He didn't strut. He looked, if anything, like the sort of man who might arrive to service your boiler, quietly fix a century-old fault, and be gone before you could offer tea. And yet his style, all guile, balance and measured elegance, had clearly made an impression. His win, edging out the likes of England's Kevin Keegan and a rising Michel Platini, wasn't just unexpected. It was quietly profound, a reminder that footballing brilliance doesn't always shout. Sometimes it tiptoes with perfect control into the spotlight. Simonsen wasn't a household name even in his own country, at least not in the way some of his more flamboyant contemporaries were. He looked to many less like a preening footballing icon, a superstar in the making, and more like a trustworthy, understated professional who might very well turn up at your door to fix your central heating, offering a quiet, efficient service. And yet, defying all expectations, he won. His victory, a narrow triumph over luminaries like England's Kevin Keegan and France's rising star Michel Platini, spoke to something profoundly charming and indeed baffling about the Ballon d'Or in that particular era. Then came the man who would take the award for the next 2 years. In 1978 and again in 1979, the Golden Ball belonged to Kevin Keegan. This marked more than a footballing feat, it was a cultural pivot. Keegan, the fiercely permed Liverpudlian, had done the unthinkable. He left a dominant Liverpool side for Hamburg, a move many saw as sporting exile. But instead he turned it into centre stage. His time in Germany was not merely successful, it was spectacle. He became more than a footballer. He was a pop star in boots, all sports cars, glossy magazine covers, and a chart-topping single. Where Beckenbauer was a statesman and Cruyff a philosopher, Keegan was a frontman, all sweat, spark and showbiz charisma. On the pitch he was relentless. A tireless terrier of a player, Keegan pressed, harried and surged with a kind of electric intensity that made even routine moments look cinematic. He dragged Hamburg to a Bundesliga title not through ethereal vision or tactical reinvention, but through sheer force of personality. His back-to-back Ballon d'Or wins weren't just a nod to his talent. They were a mirror held up to a changing game. This was the dawn of a new kind of stardom, not just being great, but being visible, marketable, memorable. Keegan's triumphs signaled that charisma could now weigh as heavily as goals, and the Ballon d'Or, slowly but surely, was beginning to reflect the shift. These years, then, were truly a period of odd winners and shifting dynamics within European football. Ballon and Beckenbauer represented the last gasps of an old world of ideological divides and tactical certainties. Simonsen was a momentary baffling defiance of celebrity, a triumph for the quiet professional. And Keegan was the future, the harbinger of a new era where fame would begin to influence the vote, and the Ballon d'Or would start to become more than just a journalistic honour, but a media spectacle in its own right. Because while Simonsen lifted his surprising trophy, his humble smile shining under the lights, and Oleg Blokin was quietly paraded as a national hero through Red Square, the true global giants of the game remained utterly unacknowledged. On the sun-baked, dusty pitches of Argentina, a teenage phenomenon named Diego Maradona was already turning matches for Argentinos juniors into a personal spectacle, a canvas for his burgeoning genius. The award continued its proud, if baffling, tradition of ignoring him with spectacular, almost pig-headed discipline. The rules, you see, remained stubbornly, immutably the same. Only European players actively playing professionally in European clubs were even in contention. If your genius, your unparalleled skill, your ability to bend the game to your will happened to occur elsewhere, in the bustling, passionate stadiums of Buenos Aires or Rio de Janeiro, in the vibrant, dusty streets of Lagos, or the rarefied air of La Paz, you might as well have been playing five-a-side in the dark, beneath a forgotten lamp-post. So this period, roughly from 1975 to 1979, becomes a kind of fascinating purgatory in the Ballon d'Or's unfolding narrative, a time when the award flirted, tentatively, with a broader sense of expansion, but only ever within its own tightly guarded, carefully manicured, gated community. It let in the Soviets with their disciplined collective power, and the Scandinavians with their understated artistry. It acknowledged the growing influence of Portuguese and Polish talents, but only so far. The invisible wall still stood firm, and behind it, far behind, waited players who would never, by virtue of their birth or their club's location, be given a seat at the annual glittering ceremony in Paris. The absurdity of this self-imposed limitation was by now undoubtedly growing. Even the most seasoned, most traditionally minded journalists, one suspects, could feel the quiet hum of it, the increasing cognitive dissonance. But the structure, the solemn list of nominees, the established panel of pens, the unspoken criteria for who matters, remained stubbornly in place. The Ballon d'Or was still a map drawn meticulously in biro, nervously glancing over its own shoulder, unsure how to properly acknowledge the vast, beautiful, exploding world of football beyond its carefully defined borders. We will now enter the 1980s, a decade of burgeoning drama and dynamic defenders, of Michel Platini's elegant pomp and Diego Maradona's increasingly unavoidable, utterly mesmerizing brilliance. We will watch as the contradictions inherent in the award begin to truly mount, and the Ballon d'Or finds itself desperately trying to catch up to a game that is already sprinting ahead, leaving its old limitations in the dust. But for now, rest easy. Perhaps dream of Alan Simonsen jogging modestly toward a podium he never truly expected to find himself on. Or Oleg Blokin lacing up his boots in the crisp, cold fog of Kiev, a quiet symbol of a world slowly, reluctantly opening up. And maybe, in a quieter corner of your dreaming mind, Kevin Keegan's perm is still gleaming under the Hamburg floodlights, a testament to a new kind of celebrity brilliance. These were the men behind the wall, lit briefly, perhaps fleetingly, by a golden glow. And somewhere beyond the curtain, Maradona waits. Not yet seen, but already casting a shadow across the pitch of history. Chapter 6, 1980 to 1984, Television and the Rise of Platini. By the early 1980s, that great, swirling drama we call football had acquired a new, powerful co-star, the television camera. Suddenly, the moments of brilliance, the flashes of genius, the thunderous goals weren't just recounted in hushed tones or scribbled furiously in newspaper columns. No, they were replayed. They were analyzed. They were slowed down, freeze-framed, discussed with earnest solemnity, and crucially, they were mythologized. The football pitch, still green in most places, well, sometimes depending on the weather and the local groundskeeper's fortitude, now shimmered under floodlights designed more for the unseen viewer tucked away in their living room than for the player squinting in their glare. Football had irrevocably become a spectacle, an entertainment product, and the Ballon d'Or, it adjusted accordingly, reflecting this new, brighter, more visually demanding world. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge was, perhaps, one of the very first to truly benefit from this new visual paradigm. In 1980 and then again in 1981, the elegant Bayern Munich forward won back-to-back Ballon d'Ors, but his triumphs weren't solely about the impressive number of goals he scored, though he was certainly prolific, claiming the Bundesliga's top scorer award multiple times during his peak. Rummenigge was more than just a poacher, he was a complete forward. He possessed a graceful, almost balletic elegance on the ball, combined with tireless industry, a cutting edge and a distinctly German swagger that seemed to translate perfectly through the cathode ray tube. He was, in essence, a star perfectly suited for the screen. Rummenigge could be slowed down in replays, his powerful runs and clinical finishes dissected from multiple angles, discussed with earnest pundits, wielding arrows and circles on telestrators. His dynamism, pace, and ability to weave through defenses were inherently telegenic, making him a compelling figure even beyond the immediacy of the live match. He led Bayern to Bundesliga titles in both 1980 and 1981, and to a European Cup final in 1982, solidifying his status as a titan of the European game. His on-field charisma, coupled with tangible team success, made him an ideal recipient in this evolving landscape. Then came the compelling, almost cinematic tale of Paolo Rossi. In 1982, the Italian striker returned from a 2-year ban, unjustly imposed for his alleged involvement in the infamous Tottenero betting scandal. His inclusion in Italy's World Cup squad was met with national outcry, and his initial performances in the tournament were, by all accounts, dismal. He was described by critics as a ghost aimlessly wandering over the field, seemingly lost, utterly devoid of confidence. But then, in a dramatic, almost biblical twist, he burst into life. 6 goals in the latter stages of the tournament, including a stunning hat-trick against a legendary Brazil side, a brace against Poland in the semi-finals, and the crucial opening goal in the final against West Germany. It was not just a performance, it was redemption with subtitles, a narrative tailor-made for the living room, for newspaper headlines that screamed of heroism and improbable comebacks. The Ballon d'Or that year went to Rossi, of course. He also famously became the only player in history to win the World Cup, its Golden Boot as top scorer, its Golden Ball as best player, and the Ballon d'Or all in a single year. But more than that, more than the physical prize, the award that year truly went to the story of Paolo Rossi. Because football now undeniably had stories. It had protagonists and antagonists, moments of despair and soaring triumph. And television, that great magnifier of myth, with its close-ups and dramatic replays, knew just how to tell them, knew how to build a narrative arc that would captivate millions. Rossi's personal battle and ultimate triumph resonated deeply, proving that beyond raw statistics, the emotional narrative could sway public and, crucially, journalistic opinion. And then came Platini, not just a footballer, but a statesman in shorts, a philosopher with impeccable technique, a conductor whose baton was his left foot. From 1983 to 1985, playing for the iconic Juventus, Michel Platini achieved an unprecedented feat at the time, 3 consecutive Ballon d'Ors. He became the first player to ever do so, cementing his place in the pantheon of footballing greats. Platini was the perfect blend of exquisite technique and uncanny timing, an almost prescient understanding of the game. He could score, yes. He was Serie A's top scorer for 3 consecutive seasons during this period, an extraordinary feat for a midfielder, and also top scorer in Juventus's victorious 1984-85 European Cup campaign. But his genius lay equally in his ability to create, to control the midfield battleground, to conduct the flow of play with an almost regal air. He was French football's renaissance, leading his national team to their first major international trophy, the 1984 European Championship, where he was both player of the tournament and its top scorer with a staggering 9 goals. And, not unimportantly, in this burgeoning age of televised stardom, he possessed an inherent elegance that looked absolutely excellent in stills, a timeless quality that transcended the often grainy footage. He was known for his vision, technical prowess, and scoring ability from midfield, which revolutionized the game. Platini's remarkable rise truly marked a profound shift in the very soul of the Ballon d'Or. It no longer belonged solely to the rampaging striker, the traditional goal-scorer. Now, it explicitly favored the midfield general, the playmaker, the orchestrator, but only if he possessed goals in his locker and drama in his boots. Subtlety, the quiet, almost invisible work of a holding midfielder or a tactically astute defender, still struggled to capture the ultimate prize. But theatrical control, the ability to dictate the tempo, to produce moments of individual magic while simultaneously driving team success, that was increasingly television gold. This shift underscored the awards criteria, explicitly attempting to balance individual performances characterized by decisive and impressive actions with team performances and achievements. This era, the early 1980s, was the beginning of the Ballon d'Or's subtle yet inexorable conversion from a purely journalistic honor to a nascent public spectacle. Voting was still, at this point, restricted to European journalists, but their decisions were increasingly, perhaps subconsciously, shaped by what they'd seen, not always in person necessarily, but overwhelmingly on screen. The game had moved from the fog-drenched terraces where one's view might be obscured by a rogue pillar or a particularly enthusiastic supporter to the comfortable, well-lit confines of the living room where every kick, every gesture, every goal was magnified and replayed. And in that fundamental move, visibility became inextricably linked to value. The players who performed best for the cameras, whose actions translated most readily to highlight reels and discussion points, began to ascend. Naturally, there were debates among the pundits and the purists. Should a Ballon d'Or winner be solely the most talented player, the purest artist, or the one who won the most trophies, the ultimate team player? Should it be based purely on quantifiable goals, or on the ineffable grace and influence of a player's overall game? Television, with its insatiable appetite for easy narratives and clear-cut heroes, generally preferred the former. It knew what it could easily package and sell. The individual statistical brilliance, such as prolific goal-scoring, was often prioritized over less overt yet equally crucial team-oriented roles. And so, the seeds of the popularity contest were sown, quietly at first, almost imperceptibly, in the fertile ground of televised football. Not quite fully bloomed yet, certainly not monetized into Instagram carousels and TikTok montages. That particular future horror was still decades away. But they were growing, nourished by the ever-present glow of the screen. These years, from 1980 to 1984, represent a fascinating, pivotal bridge in the Ballon d'Or's history. The game itself was still, in many fundamental ways, traditional, rooted in its established tactics and rivalries. But the world watching it, the very mechanism of its perception, had changed profoundly. The Ballon d'Or, ever the mirror, however imperfect, began to reflect a new kind of brilliance, one that flickered and shone most brightly at 25 frames per second. Next, we move into the later 1980s. The glorious Platini era continues its reign, adding more gleaming silverware to his already impressive collection. But so too, heartbreakingly, does the deafening silence around a small, stocky genius in Naples, a man ignored not for any lack of sheer, transcendent greatness, but for the unforgivable sin of being born in the wrong hemisphere and plying his trade beyond the award's still rigid geographical fence. For now rest. Let the soft glow of cathode rays, the echo of commentators' passion, and the glint of Michel Platini's effortlessly precise right foot ease you gently into the softer, more reflective corners of sleep. Chapter 7, 1985-1989. The years Maradona couldn't win. By the mid-1980s, that gleaming totem, the Ballon d'Or, was beginning to resemble a very elegant, albeit increasingly obvious, mistake. Michel Platini, the French maestro, had just completed his unprecedented treble, a hat-trick of trophies that confirmed him unequivocally as both the continent's finest maestro on the pitch and, crucially, a rising media darling off it. In 1985, he led Juventus to a European Cup win and another strong Serie A campaign, while continuing to dazzle for the French national side. His final Ballon d'Or win cemented a period of sublime midfield dominance, a symbol of cultivated, almost aristocratic footballing brilliance. Then, in 1986, the year of his unparalleled, almost mythic World Cup performance, the Ballon d'Or went not to Maradona, but to Igor Belanov. Belanov was, it must be said, a fine player. A forward for Dynamo Kiev, he possessed a cannon of a shot, remarkable pace, and the tireless work ethic of a Soviet sitcom protagonist. In the 1985-86 Cup Winners' Cup, he scored 4 goals and played a pivotal role in Kiev's triumph, and his 9 goals in the Soviet top league helped them secure a strong domestic finish. He also scored a hat-trick for the Soviet Union in a memorable World Cup match against Belgium, though they ultimately lost that thrilling encounter 4-3. He was, without question, a talent, but to claim he was better than Diego Maradona in 1986? Even Belanov's own mother, one suspects, might have raised a polite, disbelieving eyebrow. It's like arguing that a particularly reliable, well-engineered tractor should win a beauty contest over a perfectly formed wild stallion, a small barrel-chested Argentine, a man who, just 2 years prior, in the dazzling thin air of Mexico City, had won the 1986 World Cup more or less single-handedly. A footballing demigod who had danced past an entire English team in the brilliant sunshine, a feat later immortalized as the goal of the century. A force of nature who had lifted a provincial Italian club, Napoli, from obscurity into delirium, transforming them into Serie A champions against the mighty northern powers. He was, by nearly every quantifiable measure, and certainly by the subjective judgment of anyone with working eyes, the undisputed best footballer in the world. His name, of course, was Diego Armando Maradona. The reason for this bewildering disconnect, of course, lay not in a subjective assessment of raw ability, but in a simple, cold, bureaucratic fact: geography. The Ballon d'Or was still, stubbornly, proudly, almost defiantly, a strictly European affair. Only players born on the continent of Europe and actively playing for European clubs could even be considered for the prize. Maradona, Argentine by birth, defiantly South American in his style, and unapologetically brilliant in Naples, was, by this arbitrary rule, rendered utterly invisible to the voting panel. France Football itself, the very architects of the award, would years later publicly admit the glaringly obvious truth. Through their retrospective study in 2015, they acknowledged that Pelé, had he been eligible from the outset, might have claimed the award an astonishing 7 times. And that Maradona, without a shadow of a doubt, was, in 1986, the finest player on the planet. But by then, the damage was archival. The history books had been written, the awards handed out, the moments of injustice etched into the record. An honorary Ballon d'Or in 1995 for Maradona felt like a belated apology, a quiet whisper acknowledging a historical wrong, but it couldn't rewrite the facts of his prime. Belanov's win, then, stands as a kind of glitch in the system, a polite bureaucratic error disguised as a grand honor. It wasn't necessarily that the voters were blind to Maradona's genius. Indeed, many would have been captivated by his World Cup heroics. No, they were simply bound by the rules, trapped within a self-imposed limitation. And so, the most transcendent footballer of the decade, the man who arguably shaped the very narrative of that World Cup, was never even nominated for the award intended to crown the very best. Then, in 1987, the Golden Ball found its way to a different kind of Dutchman, Ruud Gullit. He was a force of nature with a cascade of dreadlocks, a smile that could light up a stadium, and a physique of pure, unadulterated power. Gullit wasn't a player you could pin down to a single position. He was a walking, talking, footballing revolution all by himself. He had just made a groundbreaking move to AC Milan, where his potent mix of skill, speed, and aerial ability made him the heart of Arrigo Sacchi's revolutionary new side. He was the engine, the creative force, the kind of player who could single-handedly turn a game on its head with a single burst of energy or a thumping, powerful goal. Gullit's victory was a triumph for the modern, multi-talented superstar, a moment when pure, uncontainable charisma met breathtaking skill. He was the first of the Dutch titans to claim the prize, a perfect prelude to the elegant, clinical perfection of his teammate. Marco van Basten, all lean, almost ethereal elegance and ruthless, clinical finishing. He quickly ascended, claiming the Ballon d'Or in 1988, and then again, consecutively, in 1989. Van Basten was, in many ways, the very definition of the future of the centre-forward, efficient, deadly clinical, and effortlessly coiffured. He was the kind of striker you could put on a glossy magazine cover without needing a single digital filter, his aura of perfection shining through. His first Ballon d'Or in 1988 came after he led the Netherlands to victory in the European Championship, scoring a famous, almost improbable volley in the final against the Soviet Union. His second, in 1989, was fueled by AC Milan's triumphant European Cup campaign, where his goals were vital to their continental dominance. He truly represented the pinnacle of European attacking football. It's genuinely hard to overstate the absurdity of this. Imagine, if you will, a grand international committee dedicated to rewriting musical history, a prestigious body committed to honoring the greatest talents, and then imagine that committee deciding to leave out the Beatles, not for any lack of musical brilliance, but simply because they didn't release enough records in Belgium, or perhaps because they were born on an island. The Ballon d'Or in the late 1980s, despite its burgeoning prestige and glittering roster of European champions, had become a profound paradox dressed in its finest attire. It celebrated excellence, yes, but only within the confines of a map drawn, it seemed, in colonial ink, a map that refused to acknowledge the vibrant, world-changing football emanating from other continents. It rightly named Marco van Basten the best player in Europe, and within that continental sphere he undeniably was. But globally, the silence around Diego Maradona, a silence enforced by outdated regulations, was deafening. So this era from 1985 to 1989 becomes one of quiet farce, of glaring missed opportunities, of weighty, gleaming trophies given not to the most dazzling, the most revolutionary, but to the simply most eligible. And yet the list of winners from these years still glitters. Platini, Ballon, Gullit, Van Basten. These were brilliant players, each with an undeniable case for their individual brilliance within the European context. But the omission, that vast, echoing shadow where Maradona's name should be, remains the chapter's truest, most enduring, and most heartbreaking story. Next we'll step into the 1990s. The world is changing, accelerating, and the rules of the Ballon d'Or are, finally, about to change with it. The gates are about to open, however reluctantly. But before that happens, take a breath. Imagine Diego Maradona, perhaps lighting a cigarette after training, a wisp of smoke curling upwards into the Neapolitan sky, glancing at the golden orb from afar, and maybe, just maybe, letting out a soft, knowing laugh. Chapter 8, 1990-1994. The end of an era and the overlooked defender. The early 1990s. A fascinating, often foggy transitional time, not just in the grand theatre of geopolitics, where the monumental Berlin Wall had finally fallen, and the great rigid iron curtain was now just a creased, discarded piece of fabric fading into memory. But in football too. The game was accelerating, becoming more globalized, more intricate, and yet the Ballon d'Or, it remained somehow still stubbornly draped in old maps and older, more comfortable assumptions, its golden gleam refusing to fully acknowledge the seismic shifts occurring just beyond its traditional gaze. In 1990, the prize went to Lothar Matthäus, a fitting choice, undeniably. He was the powerhouse, the tactical heartbeat, the inspirational leader. He'd captained West Germany to World Cup glory in Italy that summer, covering more ground than a Cold War diplomat on a whirlwind peace mission. Matthias was both engine and enforcer, a midfield general whose steel was subtly wrapped in remarkable technical ability and an uncanny eye for goal. He was fresh off leading Inter Milan to a Serie A title the previous year and had been their relentless driving force again through 1989-90. He was the first German to win the award since Franz Beckenbauer in 1976, a true all-rounder who could glide through midfield or marshal the back line with equal ease. And so he lifted the Golden Orb, his status as a modern footballing titan confirmed, his greatness now rendered in gold. But even as he stood on that podium, the question lingered, a quiet, insistent whisper in the background of celebratory cheers. What if England, buoyed by their improbable run, had gone just one step further? What if Paul Gascoigne, the nation's effervescent darling, hadn't cried those unforgettable tears in the semi-final against West Germany, but had, instead, conjured one more moment of magic and scored the decisive goal? Would Gaza, floppy-haired, twinkle-toed, as English as warm beer and misplaced optimism, would he have brought the Ballon d'Or back to British shores? It's a delicious thought, isn't it? Imagine the scene, Gascoigne at the glittering gala in Paris, his sparkling suit perhaps slightly askew, holding the meticulously crafted golden orb not with solemn reverence, but like a gloriously oversized, recently stolen teapot, ready to share a brew with anyone who fancied one. We'll never know, of course. The great alternate histories of football remain tantalizingly unwritten, mere fodder for late-night pub debates, but it highlights the pervasive sense, even then, that individual genius, especially if it came from outside the established powerhouses, was a fragile, easily overlooked thing. Then in 1991, the Golden Orb found its way to a truly unique talent, Jean-Pierre Papin. He was the star forward for Olympique Marseille, a club then locked in a fiercely ambitious drive for continental glory. Papin was a player whose style was a captivating blend of pure graft and astonishing artistry. He didn't just score goals, he scored what became known as the Papinades, acrobatic volleys and spectacular strikes, often seemingly plucked from thin air. He was a striker who could fall to the ground and still find a way to make the ball kiss the back of the net. He was both a worker and a magician, leading Marseille to league titles and a controversial run to the European Cup final. His victory was a nod to that singular, spectacular and utterly telegenic talent, a celebration of the sort of goal that demands to be replayed over and over again. And a year later, in 1992, the prize returned to a familiar face for a final majestic time. Marco van Basten claimed his third Ballon d'Or, an achievement that placed him alongside Cruyff and Platini in a pantheon of three-time winners. This win was not just a tribute to his phenomenal talent, but a bittersweet final chapter in a career that was, unbeknownst to all at the time, about to be tragically cut short by injury. He had been the ruthless, clinical heart of an AC Milan team that was in the midst of a record-breaking unbeaten run. His genius was in its quiet, precise perfection, a striker who could score any kind of goal with an almost inhuman elegance. It was a deserved win, a final coronation for a king who was sadly about to abdicate his throne far too soon. As the early 90s slowly crept on, the list of nominees for the Ballon d'Or remained a fascinating blend of the glorious and the strange. There was Roberto Baggio, the Italian divine ponytail, part divine inspiration, part aching fragility. In 1993, he clinched the Ballon d'Or after leading Juventus to a UEFA Cup triumph and notching a personal best of 39 goals in all competitions that calendar year. His artistry on the ball was undeniable, dribbles that seemed to defy geometry, free kicks curled like handwritten love notes, and a languid elegance that bordered on spiritual. A year later, in 1994, he would carry Italy all the way to the World Cup final, his genius flickering right until that fateful penalty miss, a moment so painful it briefly felt as though football itself had pulled a muscle. Then there was Hristo Stoichkov, the Bulgarian firebrand, fierce and flickering with Barcelona, a player of immense talent and an equally immense temperament. He would eventually win the award in 1994, not only for spearheading Bulgaria's fairy tale run to the World Cup semi-finals, where he finished joint top scorer, but also for his instrumental role in Barcelona's domestic and European success under Johan Cruyff's dream team. He was mercurial, combustible, and devastatingly effective, a left foot that could start fires, a glare that could curdle milk, and a footballing instinct as sharp as barbed wire. But behind them, always behind them in the rankings, a silent, almost ethereal presence, was Paolo Maldini. The name alone conjures images of effortless grace and unshakable composure. With his cheekbones seemingly carved from the purest Carrara marble, and his positioning blessed by geometry itself, he was the kind of defender who made chaos look entirely optional, who diffused danger with an almost insulting ease. He spent his entire illustrious career at AC Milan, becoming a club legend, a symbol of unwavering loyalty and unparalleled excellence. He won a staggering number of trophies, multiple Serie A titles, and, crucially, he was a linchpin in 5 Champions League winning sides, including the formidable Invincibles team under Fabio Capello that went 58 league matches undefeated. He never seemed to panic, never seemed to lose a single drop of sweat, even in the most intense pressure cooker of a match. And yet, despite all this, despite his undeniable status as one of the greatest defenders of all time, perhaps the greatest, he never once lifted the Ballon d'Or. In 1994, the year he won the Champions League with Milan and led Italy to the World Cup final, he came in a respectable but ultimately heartbreaking third, behind Stoichkov and Baggio. 9 years later, in 2003, at the ripe old age of 35, he found himself in third place again. A cruel symmetry, a persistent oversight for a man who rarely put a single foot wrong throughout a career spanning a quarter of a century. Why this consistent oversight? Why the perpetual polite exclusion from the very top prize? Because defenders, much like diligent librarians, steadfast goalkeepers, and indeed many unsung midfielders, rarely dominate the highlight reel. Their artistry is subtle. Their impact often felt more deeply in the absence of a spectacular opposing moment than in a moment of their own creation. They prevent the drama rather than write it. They build the foundations rather than adorn the spire. And prevention, alas, is not sexy. It doesn't generate the viral clips, the memorable sound bites, or the easy, compelling narratives that capture the public imagination and, by extension, sway the votes of even the most astute journalists. The Ballon d'Or's criteria might have mentioned overall class and fair play and team achievements, but its inherent bias towards individual performances characterized by decisive and impressive actions, which often implicitly meant goals and assists, consistently disadvantaged those whose brilliance lay in less quantifiable, more understated aspects of the game. These years, from 1990 to 1994, were, unbeknownst to many at the time, the final chapter of the Ballon d'Or's stubbornly Euro-only era. The world was clearly shifting. The geopolitical landscape had been reshaped. South American flair, African power, and Asian precision were beginning to flood European clubs, enriching the game with new styles, new talents. The invisible borders of brilliance were expanding beyond what the award had ever formally recognized, but the prize still handed out its precious gold with one hand tied firmly behind its back, willfully blind to a vast ocean of talent. It was also a time where the ethical questions surrounding the award grew louder, more insistent. Should the best player truly be the one with the flashiest statistics, the purest artist, or the one whose influence, whose very presence, made his entire team sing, who elevated the collective above the sum of its parts? The tension between individual brilliance and collective dominance became more pronounced than ever. Maldini, ever the quiet, majestic anchor, the epitome of collective strength and individual perfection, was, in a sense, punished for his very silence, for his refusal to indulge in the kind of flashy heroics that would have made him more visible to the voting eye. The Ballon d'Or, then, was teetering on the brink. It was ready to change. Not quite yet, perhaps not explicitly, but the tremors were undeniably there. The shortlists, featuring players from increasingly diverse backgrounds within Europe, hinted at a broader world that simply could no longer be ignored. And outside the velvet-robed theatre, beyond the exclusive European club, a supremely talented Liberian striker was not merely waiting patiently, but actively knocking, his powerful presence demanding to be let in. Next, we will step decisively into that change. The world, in its true, sprawling, glorious entirety, finally arrives. The rigid rules of eligibility relax. And finally, the Ballon d'Or takes its first awkward yet momentous steps toward learning to look beyond its own reflection, beyond the borders it had so meticulously and at times so unfairly maintained. But before that, take a moment for Paolo Maldini. Imagine him standing calm and regal in the defensive mist of 100 European nights, unseen perhaps by the ultimate individual accolade, but never, ever truly forgotten by those who understand the deepest, most subtle artistry of the game. Chapter 9, 1995-1999, George Weah and Globalization. At last, the doors, so long stubbornly shut, so resolutely bolted against the vibrant, swirling tide of global footballing talent, finally creaked open. In 1995, the Ballon d'Or, that gleaming, weighty symbol of individual excellence, awarded its coveted golden orb to a figure who truly redefined its historical trajectory, George Weah. A powerful, elegant striker from Liberia, plying his trade first in Monaco, then in Paris Saint-Germain, and finally making the leap to AC Milan, Weah was both raw power and exquisite grace in equal measure. His win was more than just another name added to a list. It was a resounding signal, a trumpet blast across the continents. The world, long knocking patiently on Europe's rather exclusive door, had, at long last, been let in. Weah didn't just score goals, though he did so with impressive regularity and breathtaking flair. He embodied something far rarer, something almost profound, dignity through dynamism. He possessed an almost unparalleled blend of explosive pace, astonishing strength, and balletic control. He could thunder past defenders with the effortless grace of a gazelle that had, perhaps, just finished meticulously studying a tactical manual. His iconic solo goal for Milan against Verona in 1996, picking up the ball deep in his own half and surging the length of the pitch like a man politely refusing to pass, remains a testament to his singular genius. By the time he won the Ballon d'Or, he had already been crowned African Player of the Year 3 times, and had just secured the FIFA World Player of the Year award, the first African to do so. His club resume was gleaming, a Ligue 1 title and 2 Coupe de France trophies with Paris Saint-Germain, followed swiftly by a Serie A title and a Coppa Italia with Milan. And yet it was never just about the silverware. Off the pitch he carried the quiet yet immense burden of being a symbol, a solitary silhouette standing tall for a continent whose talent had long been sidelined, a beacon for millions whose footballing dreams had, until now, gone unrecognized by the game's grandest individual honor. His win truly felt like a revolution, whispered quietly through velvet-lined corridors rather than shouted from the rooftops. At last, someone from beyond the old footballing baronies, beyond the traditional self-appointed European elite, was crowned as the best. The Ballon d'Or, for all its entrenched Eurocentric tendencies, for all its long-standing biases, had finally relented, if only slightly. It was a historic step, acknowledging footballing talent beyond the European continent, even if the primary eligibility criteria still required players to be active at European clubs. But then, in 1996, the award did a strange, almost contradictory thing. It veered hard back toward the old guard, the quiet professionals, the men whose genius lay in prevention rather than creation. The Golden Orb was given to Matthias Sammer, a German libero, a sweeper for Borussia Dortmund and the national team. Sammer was a brilliant throwback to the days of Beckenbauer. He was an uncompromising defensive force with the mind of a midfielder and the heart of a leader. He had just captained Germany to victory at the European Championship and led Dortmund to a second consecutive Bundesliga title. His win was a final, emphatic, and perhaps slightly defiant nod to the art of defending, a last hurrah for the positional genius of the libero before it became a romantic memory. Sammer's victory in a decade of glamorous attackers and dazzling flair stood as a poignant reminder that sometimes the true work of a genius is not what they create, but what they stop. Then in 1997 arrived Ronaldo, not the later, more sculpted, leaner Cristiano, but the original phenomenon. He was Il Fenomeno, a moniker earned through sheer, undeniable, breathtaking brilliance. At just 21 years and 96 days old, he stormed to victory, becoming the youngest ever winner of the Ballon d'Or, a record that still stands today. His victory wasn't just convincing, it wasn't even close. He had already, even at such a tender age, turned hardened defenders into wide-eyed spectators in Brazil with Cruzeiro, in the Netherlands with PSV Eindhoven, in Spain with Barcelona, and now finally in Italy with Inter Milan. His feet moved with a liquid fluidity, his acceleration like mischief played out on fast forward. He was pure, unadulterated joy in motion, a force of nature, and now, finally, miraculously, he was eligible for the world's most prestigious individual award. His arrival on the European scene and his subsequent Ballon d'Or explicitly underscored the shift towards acknowledging talent from outside Europe, particularly from South America. He was the first South American player to claim the award, a seismic event. Then came a truly iconic moment for a nation and for a generation. In 1998, the year France hosted and won the World Cup, the award went to their majestic playmaker Zinedine Zidane. Zidane was the central figure in that team, a player of balletic grace and deceptive strength, with an almost supernatural ability to control the ball in a phone box. He was the epitome of the calm playmaker, a silent leader who didn't need to shout to exert his will over a game. His two headers in the World Cup final against a legendary Brazilian team weren't just goals. They were moments of national apotheosis, of a country's multiracial dream made tangible. His victory was the perfect glowing climax to a World Cup story, a triumph that was as much about a nation's pride as it was about his own profound genius. The decade, which began with the fall of old walls, continued its progression towards a more inclusive vision. Rivaldo, another mesmerizing Brazilian talent, followed Ronaldo and Zidane in 1999. A quieter genius than the explosive Ronaldo, perhaps, more inscrutable in his movements but no less lethal in his impact. His win, coming after a stellar season where he clinched the La Liga title with Barcelona, capped the decade with a sense of symmetry, a powerful statement. Brazil had arrived, their vibrant, audacious style of football making an indelible mark on the European stage. South America had arrived, proving beyond doubt that the continent was a fertile ground for the very best individual talents in the world. The Ballon d'Or was, at long last, beginning to listen, its ear finally pressed to the ground, trying to catch the distant, exhilarating rhythm of football played across every ocean. And yet, even as we celebrate these triumphant moments of inclusion, a deep, persistent shadow continues to linger, like an unquiet ghost in the gilded hall of fame. The indelible fact remains: Pelé never won, Diego Maradona never won. Their boundless greatness, too expansive, too era-defining for the award's narrow, Eurocentric lens during their primes, remained heartbreakingly uncrowned. France football itself, years later, would attempt to atone, offering apologies, publishing retrospective rankings, and making wistful admissions about what might have been. Pelé, they concluded, would have won 7 times. Maradona undoubtedly would have claimed it in his legendary 1986 year. However, the truth remains, unalterable in the annals of history. The greatest never held the actual trophy during their peak, a profound anomaly that underscores the award's initial geographical limitations. For them, the formal invitation came irrevocably too late. Their absence hangs over every winner's list, a vast, echoing space, not as a slight to the deserving players who were honoured, but as a perpetual melancholic reminder of what was tragically missed, what could never be truly rectified. So this era, the latter half of the 1990s, is truly both a triumph and a tragedy. The world had moved in, yes. The gates had opened. But some doors, once closed for so long, never quite reopened for those who stood behind them in their prime. For Pelé and Maradona, the ultimate official recognition was forever denied by the arbitrary rules of a bygone era. Still, the late 90s undoubtedly saw the Ballon d'Or take its first honest, expansive breath as a truly global award. The names now appearing on the ballot, the faces captured in the winning photographs, told stories in multiple languages, reflecting a broader, richer tapestry of talent. And though insidious biases lingered, the positional bias towards attackers, the subtle preferences for certain leagues or nationalities, the very idea of best in the world now at long last had demonstrably more world in it. As we enter the new millennium, the Premier League is booming, a financial and sporting behemoth. Galacticos are gathering in Spain, forming star-studded constellations, and a certain elegant French striker named Thierry Henry is about to learn, perhaps to his quiet chagrin, just how subjective, how maddeningly elusive, and how frustratingly unfair brilliance can sometimes be when measured by a golden ball. But tonight let's linger just a little longer on the memory of George Weah, that towering symbol of change, on Ronaldo's dazzling grin, a beacon of footballing joy, on Zidane's quiet, majestic command, and on the profound revolution that began with a long overdue golden nod from Paris to the wider waiting world. Chapter 10, 2000 to 2005. The Galacticos and Thierry Henry's near miss. The turn of the new millennium brought with it the pervasive hum of satellites, the dazzling allure of global superstars, and an undeniable footballing arms race. It was an era when Real Madrid, with a theatrical flourish, began assembling their Galacticos, a collection of footballing deities like Zinedine Zidane, Luis Figo, the original Ronaldo, and David Beckham. They gathered them not so much as a cohesive team, but more like a Bond villain building a spectacularly talented, impossibly handsome boy band. It was a philosophy that explicitly prioritized spectacle over subtlety, individual stardust over gritty collective effort. A team you watched, not necessarily to see who would win, for victory was almost assumed, but rather to observe which diamond in their crown would twinkle the brightest on any given evening. Zinedine Zidane's magnificent Ballon d'Or triumph in 1998, a year after his World Cup heroics with France, had already set the tone for this new era of celebrity football. But by 2000 the award went to Luis Figo, a supremely elegant, relentlessly decisive winger who was then at the peak of his considerable powers. That year he had helped Barcelona to a second-place finish in La Liga and a Champions League semi-final, before making his seismic, history-making move to Real Madrid, a transfer that didn't just break records but tore holes in banners and hearts alike. Figo's mesmerizing dribbling, pinpoint crossing, and innate creativity made him a thrilling watch, a worthy winner, who embodied the very essence of the Galactico ethos, not just brilliance, but brilliance with baggage, spectacle draped in scandal. Then came Michael Owen in 2001, a blink-and-you-miss-him kind of winner, certainly, not because he lacked brilliance, but because his peaks were often meteoric flashes rather than enduring plateaus. His explosive speed, his predatory instincts in front of goal made him a truly exhilarating player to watch, a flash of pure lightning in his hamstrings. That year, Owen spearheaded Liverpool's remarkable treble, lifting the FA Cup, League Cup and UEFA Cup, scoring crucial goals in all three campaigns, including a memorable brace in the FA Cup final against Arsenal. He also hit a stunning hat-trick against Germany in Munich during a World Cup qualifier, a performance that catapulted him from national star to international sensation. And yet, even at the time, to many observers, his Ballon d'Or felt thin. He had edged out Raúl González, the Real Madrid talisman, whose season included a La Liga title, 32 goals, and a Champions League semi-final run. Owen's win was a subtle early indicator that the award, for all its grand pronouncements, remained deeply subjective, prone to falling in love with storylines and snapshots rather than the full-length film. Then in 2002 came the grand cinematic comeback. The Golden Orb was given to Ronaldo, the original phenomenon, for the second time in his career. It was a victory forged in the fires of personal struggle. After years of career-threatening injuries that left many to wonder if he would ever truly play again, Ronaldo had returned. He led Brazil to a World Cup triumph, finishing as the tournament's top scorer with 8 goals, including both in the final against Germany. His win wasn't just a testament to his undeniable skill, but to his incredible perseverance, a powerful story of redemption that captivated the world. He was a king who had lost his throne to pain and suffering, and had fought his way back to reclaim it. The 2003 award, though, remains a profoundly sore spot in Premier League folklore, a wound that still throbs softly beneath every Thierry Henry highlight reel. That year, the Golden Orb went to Pavel Nedved, a truly majestic player, full of tireless running, thunderous shooting, and the sort of unwavering commitment that seemed to be carved from alpine stone. He had led Juventus to the Serie A title and into the Champions League final, a campaign only marred by his suspension for that decisive match. A fine season by any measure, but not, many argued, more brilliant, more enchanting, or more era-defining than the year Thierry Henry had just conjured. In 2002-2003, he was a force of nature in ballet shoes. He wasn't just scoring, he was choreographing. A total of 32 goals in all competitions and 23 assists. In the Premier League alone, he managed 24 goals and an unprecedented 20 assists, the latter still a record today. Every flick, every run, every feint felt like a brushstroke on football's grand canvas, and yet he watched the ceremony from afar. The Ballon d'Or, for all its global posturing, still seemed to squint suspiciously at the Premier League's flair, as though brilliance that bloomed under London skies might somehow count for less than that which glistened under Turin's. Then came another formidable Serie A striker. In 2004, the Ballon d'Or was awarded to Andriy Shevchenko, the silent blade of AC Milan's attack. A striker of both immense strength and poetic subtlety, Shevchenko wasn't loud in his brilliance. He simply materialized in perfect spaces and dispatched the ball with an assassin's calm. That year he claimed the Capocannoniere title with 24 league goals, leading Milan to the Serie A crown with a cool authority. His presence in Europe was equally ominous, always lurking, always lethal. As Milan made another deep run in the Champions League, it was a deserved win, no question. And yet, his coronation subtly reinforced an emerging suspicion that no matter how dazzling the spectacle in the Premier League, it remained curiously peripheral in the eyes of the Ballon d'Or jury. The Milanese precision, the Italian tactical mystique, these still seemed to whisper louder in the corridors of influence. England could marvel at Henry, at Rooney, at Gerrard, but the award, as ever, looked first to the weight of history, and Italy had more than enough of that in its back pocket. And in 2005, the pendulum swung decisively, but stayed firmly in the orbit of continental excellence. The award was given to Ronaldinho, a Brazilian magician who was, in that year, nothing short of the most joyful footballer on the planet. He played with a theatrical flair and a mischievous smile that seemed to say, "I'm not just here to win, I'm here to entertain." His elastic dribbling, his no-look passes, his audacious free kicks, and his sheer, boundless enthusiasm began a new chapter for Barcelona, leading them to a La Liga title and setting the stage for their future dominance. His win was a celebration of pure, unadulterated joy and skill, a reminder that football's highest purpose is, ultimately, to dazzle and delight. The great Premier League injustice around Henry's brilliance in the eyes of many wasn't just personal, it felt deeply systemic. The Ballon d'Or, for all its newly acquired global pretensions, still bore the faint yet indelible fingerprints of its continental past. Research would later confirm the presence of similarity biases, where voters disproportionately favored candidates from their own country, continent, or, crucially, their own league. This meant that players from certain leagues, embodying certain stylistic templates, often those favored by the traditional continental press, were simply easier to vote for. They fit the perceived mold of a Ballon d'Or winner, perhaps subtly and subconsciously. And so the award, in these years of Galactico glamour and Premier League ascendancy, became a fascinating, sometimes frustrating lens on perception itself. It highlighted the complex interplay of who gets truly seen and how they are seen. It raised the enduring question of whether merit is genuinely measured in objective goals and assists, or in the more nebulous yet powerful currency of geography, traditional prestige, and media narrative. By 2005, the Galactico era in Madrid was beginning to fray, its unsustainable model showing cracks. But the profound questions it raised about the power of narrative, the amplifying effect of visibility, and the enduring influence of league prestige on individual accolades would linger long after the final star signing had departed. So now we enter the storm. A decade-long duel is about to begin, an era defined by two titans of the modern game, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. But before their unprecedented rivalry truly grips the footballing world, spare a quiet thought for Thierry Henry, balletic in his movement, brutal in his finishing, and somehow, maddeningly, perpetually overlooked by the golden glow of the Ballon d'Or. Chapter 11, 2006-2009, The Final Defender and the Start of the Duopoly. By the mid-2000s, the Ballon d'Or, with its long-established habits and its innate preference for goal-scoring glamour, did something truly, almost delightfully strange. It looked away from the dazzling strikers, the silky playmakers, the emerging Instagram darlings in waiting, the very archetypes it usually gravitated towards, and in a moment that felt like a collective deep breath, handed the gleaming golden orb to a defender. That defender was Fabio Cannavaro, in 2006, Italy's rugged, unflappable captain. He was compact, fearless, and seemed to have been born with an innate understanding of space, a preternatural gift for interception. He embodied the ancient noble art of defending. That summer he had led Italy to an unforgettable World Cup triumph in Germany, orchestrating a defensive masterclass that made attackers think twice, then inevitably lose the ball anyway, often with a bewildered shrug. Cannavaro wasn't flashy, he didn't need to be. His positioning was pure poetry in motion, his timing borderline clairvoyant, his leadership a quiet, unyielding force that radiated through the entire Italian squad. His performances were so immense that Italy conceded only 2 goals throughout the entire tournament, one an unfortunate own goal, the other a penalty, a testament to a defensive wall that earned him the apt, almost mythical nickname Il Muro di Berlino, the Berlin Wall. His individual accolades that year were simply overwhelming. Beyond the Ballon d'Or, he also clinched the FIFA World Player of the Year award, making him the only defender in history to win both of football's most prestigious individual honours in the same year. He had been a colossal figure for Juventus in the years leading up to the World Cup, anchoring a defence that, despite the club's later Calciopoli scandal and the revocation of their Serie A titles, was still undeniably dominant on the field. It was a brief, nostalgic nod to the vital, yet often unheralded art of defending before the spotlight, with its relentless, almost magnetic pull swung back irrevocably toward goals, assists, and the dazzling forward lines. Cannavaro's win was not, as many might have hoped, a genuine changing of the guard, a fundamental recalibration of the awards criteria. Instead, it was more like the final, exquisite drink before last orders, a polite, almost valedictory reminder that defenders could, once in a very great while, be more than just names on the team sheet, more than just the silent enforcers. He was only the 3rd defender to ever win the award, following Franz Beckenbauer and Matthias Sammer. His success, remarkable as it was, remained an anomaly, an outlier against the prevailing winds of footballing fashion. Then in 2007 came a player who in retrospect felt like the perfect bridge between 2 eras. Kaká. A Brazilian playmaker of sublime grace and power, he was the final star of the old guard, a pure, unadulterated talent before the new duopoly took over. He was the undisputed heart of a dominant AC Milan side, leading them to a famous Champions League triumph. He finished that tournament as its top scorer with 10 goals, including a memorable, breathtaking performance against Manchester United in the semi-final. He possessed a thrilling blend of explosive pace, a powerful shot, and an ethereal quality on the ball that made him a joy to watch. He played with a smile that was both humble and magnificent. He was the last of his kind to be crowned, the final note of a beautiful, rich symphony before the music changed forever. And change it did. In 2008, the year's winner, Cristiano Ronaldo, was a monument to a new kind of modern perfection. He was not just a player, but a brand, sculpted like pure, unadulterated ambition, with a tireless work ethic and an insatiable desire to be the best. That season with Manchester United, he had been a phenomenon, an unstoppable force who had propelled his team to a Premier League and Champions League double. He scored a staggering 42 goals across all competitions, a number that seemed at the time almost alien. His triumph that year was not just a victory, it was a coronation, a celebration of the complete footballing machine, a testament to a player who had combined skill with athleticism, celebrity with statistics, and had now finally seized the golden orb for the first time. By 2009, just 3 short years after Cannavaro's unexpected triumph, the world of football had begun to tilt irrevocably. A new hierarchy was rapidly emerging, one based less on the traditional roles and positions of players and more on the magnetic allure of individual personas, the almost celestial gravitational pull of a few chosen stars. That year, Lionel Messi won his very first Ballon d'Or. A quiet lad from Rosario, Argentina, unassuming in stature, his movements on the pitch were a mesmerizing, almost preternatural ballet. His dribbling like water, effortlessly dodging pebbles, finding the path of least resistance through the most crowded spaces. He was the undisputed star of Pep Guardiola's revolutionary Barcelona team, a side that year swept all before them, achieving a historic treble. La Liga, the Copa del Rey, and the UEFA Champions League. Messi himself was utterly pivotal, scoring a crucial 9 goals in that Champions League campaign, including a memorable header against Cristiano Ronaldo's Manchester United in the final. His debut win was not a whisper, it was a roaring declaration. He secured the award by a then record margin, amassing 473 points, a staggering 240 points ahead of his nearest competitor. Together, these two titans, Messi and Ronaldo, would not merely feature in the top rankings, they would utterly dominate the next decade, turning the Ballon d'Or into an almost private, personal contest, a duopoly unprecedented in the award's long history. But here in 2009 was the very first whisper, the subtle murmur of what was inevitably to come, the undeniable beginning of an era, a binary star system around which the entire footballing galaxy would seemingly orbit. The award in these transitional years looked visibly torn, caught between 2 powerful opposing forces. On one side there was the defiant triumph of Cannavaro, providing a fleeting, almost fragile proof that defenders could, in theory, still win, that defensive mastery could, on occasion, command the ultimate individual recognition. On the other, however, was the ever-growing, almost irresistible magnetism of forwards, not just for their goals, which were always important, but for their ability to generate headlines, to sell replica shirts, to produce the viral clicks and shares that were increasingly becoming the currency of modern football's global discourse. In this shifting landscape, the midfield maestros, the quiet, almost invisible organizers, began to vanish from the very top step of the podium. The tempo setters, the tireless ball winners, the ones who often ran the most kilometers in a game, but were noticed the least by the casual eye, they all quietly disappeared behind the dazzling flare of the forward lines, their profound impact often overshadowed by the sheer, quantifiable output of goals and assists. The beauty of their subtle work, their intricate passing patterns, and their ability to dictate the flow of a match simply didn't translate as easily into the highlight reels that dominated the global conversation. Ethically, the tension within the award's very criteria grew ever more acute. What truly mattered more? A season's relentless, consistent individual brilliance week in, week out across all competitions, or one glorious, perhaps even fairy tale-like month of national glory at a major tournament, like a World Cup. Cannavaro's unexpected win was built almost entirely on the shimmering gold of the World Cup. But the burgeoning Messi-Ronaldo era, just beginning its spectacular ascent, would decisively favour consistent year-long excellence, prolific scoring in elite club competitions, and the relentless accumulation of individual records. It was the grind over the glory, the marathon of statistics over the sprint of a singular, magnificent tournament. So this chapter, from 2006 to 2009, stands as a critical hinge in the Ballon d'Or's long, winding journey. It marks the undeniable end of defensive dreams for the foreseeable future, a quiet farewell to the possibility of a backline player consistently vying for the top honour, and it signals irrevocably the thunderous start of a binary era, a rivalry so intense, so statistically dominant, that it would transform the very nature of the award. It was arguably the last time the Ballon d'Or truly felt like it might genuinely, profoundly surprise you. Next we dive headfirst into that binary. 10 years of duels, of fervent debates that raged across continents, and of statistical decimals pushed to their absolute limits. But for now, remember Fabio Cannavaro, lifting the golden orb with a broad, almost disbelieving smile, blissfully unaware that a defender of his kind wouldn't be back at that very top step for a very, very long time. Let his quiet, resolute presence guard your slumber. Chapter 12, 2010-2019, the Messi and Ronaldo era. This decade, from 2010 to 2019, did not so much belong to two players as it was leased, in its glittering entirety, to them. A unique, almost monopolistic period in footballing history. For 10 long years, the Ballon d'Or became a private timeshare, a rotating golden key held exclusively by Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. They were two artists with wildly different brushes, certainly, one a soft, ethereal watercolour, the other a bold, dramatic oil painting, but each, in their own incomparable way, created masterpiece after masterpiece in alternating years. Messi, the elusive celestial genius, seeming to shrink from the very spotlight even as it relentlessly chased him across every pitch. His dribbles were a whisper of magic, his goals a sudden, breathtaking eruption. Ronaldo, the chiseled, inevitable force, a walking, breathing headline, sculpted like raw ambition, whose relentless pursuit of perfection drove him to train like the very gym itself owed him money. He embodied power, precision, and an almost defiant self-belief. Between them, these two titans claimed every single Ballon d'Or awarded during this decade, save for one notable exception we shall come to. Each season became a global referendum on preference. Would it be Messi's graceful finesse or Ronaldo's overwhelming force? The innate magic or the meticulous mathematics of goal scoring? The rest of the footballing world, it seemed, was reduced to little more than beautiful background scenery, a supporting cast in a blockbuster drama starring two, and only two, leading men. And in that magnificent scenery, many truly fine players were heartbreakingly, quietly overlooked, their own colossal achievements dimmed by the blinding glare of this unparalleled duopoly. The year 2010 stands as one of the most contentious moments in the award's entire history. Lionel Messi undoubtedly won that year. Fair enough, by many metrics, he was simply sensational. He scored an astonishing 60 goals and provided 17 assists in 64 games across all competitions for Barcelona and Argentina, bagging 6 hat-tricks. He led Barcelona to a La Liga title and was the top scorer in both La Liga and the Champions League. His individual brilliance was unquestionable, but so too was the collective triumph of two other contenders, Andres Iniesta and Wesley Sneijder. Andres Iniesta, Messi's own Barcelona teammate, was the quiet architect of arguably the greatest club side of its generation. And, crucially, in the summer of 2010, he had scored the winning goal in the World Cup final for Spain, securing their first ever global triumph. He was named man of the match in that final and selected for the tournament's all-star team. Sneijder, the Dutch midfield dynamo, had orchestrated a historic treble with Inter Milan, winning Serie A, the Coppa Italia, and most impressively the Champions League under Jose Mourinho, where he was arguably their most important player. He then went on to reach the World Cup final with the Netherlands, scoring 5 goals and receiving 4 Man of the Match awards, ultimately being named the second best player of the tournament. Both, by traditional standards of team achievement and decisive action in the biggest moments, had equally strong, if not stronger, claims. The backlash was immediate and widespread. It prompted France football itself to later issue a rare, almost unprecedented public apology to Iniesta. Pascal Ferré, the magazine's editor, wrote, "Forgive us, Andres. His sacrifices for the team ultimately deprived him of greater individual recognition." A quiet apology, certainly, tucked gently behind the golden curtain of history, but a damning indictment of a voting system that seemed to prioritize individual statistical output over a player's profound influence on collective success, particularly when that influence was less directly attributable to goals and assists. This was the first year of the newly merged FIFA Ballon d'Or, where national team coaches and captains, in addition to journalists, cast their votes. This broadened electorate, perhaps seeking global individual icons, may have unwittingly amplified the perceived popularity contest aspect, overlooking collective achievements for dazzling personal numbers. Then came the extraordinary saga of 2013. Frank Ribery had just completed an utterly dominant season, leading Bayern Munich to a historic treble, the Bundesliga, the Champions League and the DFB Pokal. He was the German giant's creative heartbeat, providing the assist for Arjen Robben's winning goal in the Champions League final and himself scoring 34 goals in all competitions. He had also been crowned the UEFA Best Player in Europe, a strong indicator of his continental supremacy. He was, to all sensible observers, the overwhelming favourite for the Ballon d'Or. But as the original voting deadline approached, a strange, almost conspiratorial murmur swirled through the footballing ether. FIFA, citing a lack of eligible voters submitting their ballots, took the unprecedented step of extending the voting window by 2 weeks. During this conveniently extended period, Cristiano Ronaldo, despite having won no major silverware with Real Madrid that season, went on a truly spectacular scoring spree. Most notably, he scored a sensational hat-trick that single-handedly secured Portugal's qualification for the 2014 World Cup in a playoff against Sweden, a narrative moment perfectly captured and amplified by global media. He ultimately won the award, edging out Messi and Ribery. Ribery, understandably, looked on, not just in disappointment, but with a palpable sense of injustice. It felt, to many, like raw politics had infected the beautiful game's most prestigious individual award, or at the very least, a cynical manipulation of performance narratives. Then UEFA President Michel Platini jokingly, or perhaps not so jokingly, suggested that FIFA extended the voting to please Ronaldo. Allegations of vote rigging surfaced, with some national team coaches even claiming their submitted votes had been altered. Ribery continues to this very day to express his belief that he was robbed and that the decision was nothing less than a political choice. The award had always been a mirror reflecting glory, but now, increasingly, the mirror was mounted firmly within a television studio, reflecting not just brilliance, but carefully crafted branding, compelling narratives, and the sheer, overwhelming noise of modern commercialized football. The voting process itself continued its chameleon-like shape-shifting during this era. From 2007 to 2015, the Ballon d'Or merged with the FIFA World Player of the Year award, becoming the FIFA Ballon d'Or. This partnership was intended to consolidate the two most prestigious individual awards into a single, universally recognized accolade, leveraging FIFA's global authority and transforming the annual ceremony into a global spectacle. This meant that national team coaches and captains joined the journalists in having a say, a broader, more democratic approach of a sort, but this collaboration proved temporary. In 2016, the partnership abruptly concluded, leading the award to revert to its original name, the Ballon d'Or, with France football reclaiming sole stewardship and the vote returning exclusively to journalists. Did it help restore the award's perceived integrity? Perhaps slightly, but by then the award had become irrevocably a spectacle, less a prize purely for performance, and more a grand confirmation of global fame, an affirmation of celebrity status. The Messi-Ronaldo duel, undeniably beautiful in its relentless pursuit of excellence, was also blinding, obscuring much else that was happening on the world's pitches. The duopoly continued, with Messi and Ronaldo trading the prize from 2014 to 2017, a 4-year period of relentless statistical warfare that pushed the very boundaries of what was thought possible in football. But then in 2018, the decade's single glorious exception occurred. Luka Modric finally broke the duopoly, a stunning victory that felt like a quiet act of rebellion against the established order. A subtle, serene, almost otherworldly Croatian midfielder, Modric was the very epitome of the selfless team player, the metronome that keeps the entire orchestra in time without ever needing to play a loud, showy solo. That year, he had been the central figure in Real Madrid's 4th Champions League win in 5 years, and perhaps more significantly, he had captained an underdog Croatia side to an improbable World Cup final. His win was a victory for the organisers, the tempo setters, the quiet thinkers of the game, the very kind of players who had been so cruelly overlooked in years past. It was a brief, beautiful and profoundly poignant moment of hope that the Ballon d'Or might, after all, still be able to look past goals and glamour and see the deeper, more intricate genius that truly makes the game sing. The roll call of those who consistently fell short during this golden duopoly is long and poignant. Xavi Hernandez, Iniesta's midfield partner, the quiet conductor of Barcelona's tiki-taka symphony, never won despite his unparalleled influence. Iniesta himself, despite his World Cup winning goal and his sublime artistry, never won. Wesley Sneijder, after his incredible treble and World Cup final, never won. Franck Ribéry, after his treble, never won. All four had individual years, seasons of such relentless brilliance and collective achievement that, in any other era of football, would have almost certainly made them legends, undisputed recipients of the Golden Ball. Instead, they became honourable mentions, incredibly talented background artists in someone else's era-defining dynasty. And so, this decade, the 2010s, should be remembered not just for the astonishing, truly undeniable brilliance of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, which was in its own right an unprecedented era of sustained genius, but also for what that brilliance inadvertently eclipsed: the nuance, the subtle orchestration, the quiet, profound influence of players who turned games without ever needing to trend on Twitter. The Ballon d'Or in this time became the most glamorous, most fiercely debated, and arguably most commercially driven popularity contest on earth. And in doing so, for a significant portion of its history, it seemed to forget the very thing it once promised: to truly and objectively reward the best. We approach the slow, inevitable end of the duopoly. A controversial, unprecedented cancellation, a defensive midfielder who defied decades of bias, and the quiet, uncertain dawn of a new kind of winner, in a game that continues to evolve at breakneck speed. But for no W, as the night deepens, spare a gentle thought for the ones who were almost, too subtle, too selfless, too quietly influential to ever truly win. Let their unseen threads guide you into slumber. Chapter 13, 2020-2024, Controversy, Cancellation and the New Guard. By the nascent years of the 2020s, a new unsettling silence had descended upon the grand operatic stage of football. The long, magnificent duet of Messi and Ronaldo had been cut short not by a new crescendo, but by an invisible, ubiquitous force. In 2020, for the very first time since its creation in 1956, since Sir Stanley Matthews first picked up that weighty prize, the Ballon d'Or was controversially cancelled. COVID-19, that invisible, ubiquitous force, had interrupted everything. It had fractured seasons, tragically taken lives, and profoundly disrupted the very rhythms of global sport and daily existence. Yet football, with a staggering blend of resilience and sheer commercial imperative, carried on, adapting to empty stadiums and crammed schedules. And in the midst of that disorienting blur, one player stood out undeniably, overwhelmingly: Robert Lewandowski. The Polish striker scored goals like breath, one after another, each more clinical, more precise, more utterly inevitable than the last. He didn't just score, he obliterated records, demonstrating a relentless, almost machine-like efficiency. He was the spearhead of a Bayern Munich side that in that shortened, chaotic season achieved a historic treble, winning the Bundesliga, the DFB Pokal, and the coveted UEFA Champions League. Lewandowski wasn't just the top scorer in one of those competitions, or two. He was the sole top scorer in all three, a feat only matched by Johan Cruyff with Ajax in 1972, but uniquely, Lewandowski was the sole top scorer in each of those competitions. He notched a staggering 55 goals in just 47 appearances across all competitions. By overwhelming consensus across the footballing world, by any metric you cared to use, he was, in that moment, the undisputed best player on the planet. But the award was not given. France football cited the irregular seasons, the disrupted competitions, the sheer impossibility of fairly comparing players across such varied and fragmented circumstances. Many understood the reasoning, nodding with a weary acceptance of the world's grim new reality. Some, however, did not, feeling a profound, almost cruel injustice had been dealt. Even Lionel Messi himself, the reigning king, publicly stated, with characteristic humility, that Lewandowski truly deserved the trophy for that year. The world, in its collective wisdom, nodded in agreement, then, with a sigh, moved on, because the nature of the crisis simply demanded it. Lewandowski remained brilliantly prolific in the years that followed, certainly continuing his relentless goal-scoring, but that singular golden moment, his undisputed, career-defining peak, had passed without formal recognition. The golden orb, elegant, capricious, and at times profoundly unfair, had, in its own way, simply dodged him, a silent, almost whimsical act of denial. Then, in 2021, came a controversial victory that was a testament to the enduring power of narrative over raw statistics. Lionel Messi won his 7th Ballon d'Or, a record-extending triumph that was met with widespread debate. His season with Barcelona and then Paris Saint-Germain was good, but not, many argued, as statistically dominant as Lewandowski's. The key, it seemed, was the story. Messi had finally, at long last, won his first major international trophy with Argentina, lifting the Copa America. It was a career-defining moment, a narrative that resonated deeply with voters, and it was a story that, once told, became impossible to ignore. The voting and its outcome was a direct consequence of the duopoly's legacy and the focus on a singular, powerful, emotionally resonant moment, even when faced with overwhelming machine-like statistical output from a rival. In 2022, the award provided a moment of classic narrative-driven triumph that harked back to the glorious days of old. Karim Benzema, the quiet, understated star of Real Madrid, finally received his long-overdue coronation. His career had been one of relentless excellence, often overshadowed by the larger-than-life figure of Cristiano Ronaldo. But in the 2021-22 season, a year where he captained Real Madrid to a stunning La Liga and Champions League double, Benzema was simply undeniable. He scored 44 goals in 46 appearances, including a series of dramatic, single-handed comebacks against Europe's elite in the Champions League. His win, at the age of 34, made him the oldest winner since Stanley Matthews. It felt like a triumph for the quiet professional, a recognition of a subtle, masterful talent who had waited patiently in the wings, finally stepping into the golden light. And then, in 2023, the operatic duet came roaring back for one final poignant encore. Lionel Messi won his 8th Ballon d'Or, this time for his greatest, most career-defining achievement of all, captaining Argentina to a World Cup triumph in Qatar. While many, including a resurgent Erling Haaland after his record-breaking, treble-winning season with Manchester City, had a claim to the award based purely on club-level statistics, Messi's World Cup narrative was simply too powerful to be ignored. It was the culmination of a decade and a half of duels, of a rivalry that had defined an era, and now, finally, the man who had been defined by what he hadn't won with his national team had completed the ultimate fairy tale. The win was less about a single season's worth of numbers and more a profound global acknowledgement of a career, a myth, and an ultimate poetic victory. But even with the duopoly now seemingly at a close, the controversy continued. In 2024, Rodri, Manchester City's pivot, their metronome, their silent, ever-present shield, won the Ballon d'Or. Just barely, perhaps. Just loudly enough for the world to notice, to debate, to ponder. His achievements were undeniable. He was a key figure in Manchester City's record-breaking fourth consecutive Premier League title and the bedrock of Spain's triumphant Euro 2024 campaign, anchoring both sides with his intelligence and passing range. Experts across the game lauded him as the perfect midfielder and the most intelligent player in his position in the world, a true master of tactical control. His win, in its own understated way, was as significant a statement against positional bias as Modric's, perhaps even more so for a player whose contributions were so fundamentally defensive. But even in this historic victory, Rodri's win was not simple, not universally celebrated. Real Madrid, a club whose own star player, Vinicius Jr., was widely tipped for the award after a strong season, and whose defender Dani Carvajal was also a contender, made headlines by famously refusing to attend the gala. This extraordinary boycott was a loud, clear signal of their dissatisfaction, a public declaration of a belief that their candidates had been unjustly overlooked. Cristiano Ronaldo, perhaps a little ironically given his own 2013 controversy, also weighed in, claiming Vinicius Jr. deserved the award. Rodri himself later spoke with a weary, knowing grace about the controversy, noting that you have to know how to win, but knowing how to lose is just as important, and expressed his respect for Madrid's decision, even if he wouldn't have acted the same way. The debate raged, highlighting the persistent popularity contest aspect and the inherent subjectivity that continues to plague the award. So even in this post-Messi Ronaldo era, where the duopoly has ostensibly ended, where new names are finally etching themselves onto the golden ball, the same persistent debates continue to rage, to simmer, to boil beneath the surface. Positional bias, that stubborn preference for attacking flair, remains a constant shadow. The amplifying power of the global media spotlight, the relentless pull of commercial gravity, and the constant question of who gets seen and who gets framed as the best. These forces are still very much at play, shaping outcomes as much as on-field performance. The Ballon d'Or has, in fairness, continued its efforts to modernize. In 2022, the award's timing was officially shifted to align with the European football season, typically running from August to July rather than the traditional calendar year. This adjustment aimed for a more coherent and relevant assessment of a player's performance within a single competitive cycle. Then in 2024, UEFA, European football's powerful governing body, formally joined as a co-organizer of the gala. This partnership was explicitly designed to enhance the stature and global reach of the awards, and less romantically, to market their commercial rights more effectively. But the fundamental voting mechanism still remains with France Football and its refined, now internationally diverse journalist jury, comprised of one representative per country from the top 100 FIFA-ranked nations. It is a jury designed for expertise, certainly a smaller, more specialized group compared to the FIFA merger years, but still at its core, inherently subjective. Modric's win in 2018 and Rodri's in 2024, they undeniably broke the mold, demonstrating that excellence beyond goals and assists, a genius rooted in control, orchestration, and defensive solidity, could in rare, glorious moments be recognized. But the mold, the underlying framework of perception, commercial influence, and inherent bias remains firmly in place, just out of shot, ready to subtly shape future outcomes. As the night deepens, let the golden names of this era, the one who was robbed, the one who earned his crown, the one who secured his myth, and the one who defied all expectations, lead you gently into the quiet halls of slumber. Conclusion: the enduring paradox. So here we are, at the end of our slow pursuit of a shining orb, our quiet wander through the gilded, often contentious, history of the Ballon d'Or. We've seen its birth, its limitations, its expansions, and its persistent contradictions. The Ballon d'Or, when you peel back the layers of polished lacquer and the dazzling glare of flashbulbs, is, at its very core, a paradox wrapped in prestige. It seeks to define the singular best in a game that intrinsically thrives on collectivity, on the seamless interplay of 11, or indeed 22 human beings. It awards the individual in a sport that, at its most fundamental, punishes ego and demands selfless sacrifice. It declares a definitive certainty in a world of glorious uncertainty, where the bounce of a ball, the whim of a referee, or the fickle finger of fate can alter destinies in an instant. At its heart lies a fundamental philosophical tension. How do you truly measure excellence in a team game? Can you objectively weigh the sheer volume of goals against the perfectly timed tackle? Can you truly balance a decisive assist against a crucial momentum-shifting anticipation? Can you distill raw attacking flair against the quiet, tireless graft of a defensive midfielder? Can you indeed truly reduce the rich, complex tapestry of football into a single name, held aloft on a stage, bathed in golden light? And yet we keep trying. We gather, we debate, we ponder, and we bestow. The Ballon d'Or is not just a trophy. It's a powerful ritual, an annual pilgrimage for the footballing world. It is simultaneously a mirror, reflecting not just the brilliance on the pitch, but also the values, biases, and commercial realities of the era in which it is awarded. It is a perpetual conversation starter, sparking impassioned barroom debates, generating endless TikTok reels, igniting late-night forum threads, and perhaps even inspiring a few sleepy bedtime podcasts. It is undeniably flawed, increasingly commercialized, and often frustratingly biased. But it is also paradoxically widely adored, eagerly anticipated, and fiercely defended. Its inherent subjectivity, the very thing that leads to so much debate, is both its curse and strangely its most enduring charm. Because every era in its long history has its should-have-won stories. Every vote we now know has its subtle wrinkle, its implicit bias. Every winner stands not truly alone on that stage, but in the shimmering, ghostly company of the nearlies, the never-quites, and the quietly magnificent. Still, for all the perceived injustice, for all the overlooked elegance, for all the players whose genius was too subtle or too geographically inconvenient, the golden ball endures. It rolls on, gathering new layers of myth and memory with each passing year. It gleams, not with the illusion of absolute perfection, perhaps, but with the warm, reassuring glow of football's glorious, unpredictable, beautiful messiness. And perhaps, as we lay our heads down, drifting toward dreams stitched in hexagons and headlines, we might find ourselves picturing it, the Ballon d'Or, held aloft not always by the flashiest, the most commercially viable, or the one with the most trends, but by the one who, in some indefinable way, made us feel something profound about the game, something hard to define in statistics and utterly impossible to forget. Good night from Lowerleagues. And thank you, truly, for joining us on this very slow, very winding, very surreal journey through the strange, glittering inner life of football, where the quiet details often speak the loudest. If these quiet musings have brought you a moment of peace, a gentle nudge towards slumber, then do consider liking this episode. And perhaps if you'd care to, subscribe to the channel so that we can share future sleepy football stories, tales to lull you gently toward the touchline of sleep. But until then, keep a quiet eye on those Sunday league games. You just never know who might be stepping onto that muddy grass next, with dreams of gold in their boots and mud on their shins, their own quiet claim to forgotten glory.